Okay, hello everybody. We're gonna start in about a minute, just while participants get in. Let's see. Okay. Great, they're all pouring in. This is great. Awesome. Hang on one second, I'm getting some audio feedback. Okay, great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Michael Grimaldi. I'm the director of the drawing department and faculty chair. And today for our panel discussion, I'm happy to have Jiannan Wu, Charlotte Segall, and Kaitlyn Stubbs. And welcome to the Academy. So Jiannan is an artist specializing in sculpture from Dalian, China. He's an elected member of the American National Sculpture Society, member of American Medallic Sculpture Association and World Economic Forum, global shaper of Dalian Hub. Jiannan received his BFA degree in sculpture from China Academy of Art and his MFA degree in sculpture from the New York Academy of Art in 2016, I believe. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Through formats of relief and diorama, Jiannan presents the theme of contemporary urban life in realism and a narrative way. And also you're going to be teaching next semester, I believe, in the sculpture department at the New York Academy of Art. So welcome back. It's good to see you again. Charlotte Segall is an American painter and draftsman based in New York City. Her interrogation of representational image making has led to key accolades. These include publications in New American Painting and the Aesthetica Art Prize Anthology, fellowships issued by the Vermont Studio Center, the Triangle Arts Association, the Leipzig International Art Programme, and the Altos de Chavón School of Design, amongst others. Segall was honored to receive funding from her MFA at the New York Academy of Art through the David Kratz and Gregory Unis Fund, a President Scholars Award, and the Leslie and Francis Posey Foundation. Her work appears in the collections of the Brooklyn Museum and Eileen Guggenheim, and she's been included in exhibitions at the Brooklyn Museum and the Angerlehner, am I saying that correctly? Museum in Austria, close enough, okay. And Kaitlyn Stubbs is an artist and educator. Hi, Kaitlyn, based in Brooklyn. She earned her BFA from the University of Georgia in 2010 and an MFA from the New York Academy of Art in 2012. She's taught people of all ages and abilities in art museums for over a decade, including the Museum of Fine Arts Boston, MoMA, and Cooper Hewitt Smithsonian Design Museum. Last year, she completed the Eric Fischel 66 Artisan Residency Teaching Program at West Nottingham Academy. She currently paints in her Brooklyn studio and has solo shows, has a solo show, Windows on View, with the online platform AVFTF, A Vision for the Future. Kaitlyn, welcome all of you, and thanks for joining us and giving some insights post graduation and life as an artist and things like that. So I'd like to start just by having you all like maybe share your work, maybe starting with Jiannan and doing a screen share to give your work some context, and feel free to talk about what you do and how you do it and things that are in your mind. So
yeah, thank you, Michael. So these are some new pieces I just finished this year, currently on view at Gallery Posen. These this piece is about 60 centimeters long. It's a relief sculpture. It's made of resin, wood, and metal, and painted with acrylic. It's inspired by like a news photo of the like Hong Kong protests like 2 years ago. And this one is about like a 50 centimeters long. It's a relief sculpture installed in like an antique TV case, and there's a LED light inside because the top is covered, so I have to give it some top light. And this one is about the authenticity about the media press, because I live in both China and the US. I know how the media could influence people. You know, the one same thing could be reported in like a complete different ways. So the background is you can see the Tom, Jerry, and in the front are some like Chinese cartoon characters. They are like fighting each other. So it's an impossible scene, but it happens in the news. Yeah, and in the front there's some like the from letter is like a superhero defeat the enemies and some like inspirational slogans. And this one is about 70 centimeters long. It's like one of my earliest memory of like a soccer game in 1998. And I want to use this game to carry to reconnect my like a childhood memory, because in that year, like when I was 9 years old, my impression about that year is like full of crisis. You know, something happened in my family, and you know, like my favorite soccer team out, and a lot of bad things, and it's like a full of crisis for me. So like I use the red color to show this kind of dangerous atmosphere, and this like this shooting moment to show the like a tense feeling. So it's kind of like a diary for me. I use like this kind of public event to record. And this one is also like a soccer game. It's actually like a final game in 2006, and it also carries my memories of that year. So here is like a pretty famous moment. The Zidane hit the defender. This piece is about 80 centimeters long, and it is hung on the wall for display. Yeah, so that's the 4 pieces I'm showing.
Those are so beautiful. Could I ask how deep are those typically? Like this one, for instance, they're so realistic, and they give a sense of just such a great sense of depth that.
Yeah, like this piece is about 20 centimeters depth. So sorry, I don't know how much inches it is, but probably like this depth. Yeah, I just compress everything and keep it as low as possible.
Oh, that's great. Thanks for sharing your work. And Charlotte, would you just screen share?
Beautiful work.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I'm daunted to follow you. I'm gonna talk. How's my audio? Do I sound all right? You guys hear me?
Perfect.
Thank you, Michael. Thank you to everybody. I'm really happy to be here and reconnect and touch base. So let me pull up what I've got to show. So this drawing is fairly recent, and kind of a return to some older themes for me. It's charcoal, a lot of charcoal powder, and some white Conte also on Fabriano cold press on a about 60 by 80 inch piece that's mounted to panel. Yeah, so I put also a detail of some of the finer feathery bits there. For people who are familiar with my work, I made a lot of drawings that were like this a long time ago that were tiny, that were done in pen, and it's kind of been this lifelong desire to try and make a big one. That very simple problem to solve has vexed me for the longest time. So this feels like important for me as kind of a breakout to realize that the charcoal powder afforded me a subtractive mark that kind of bridged the gap in terms of scale. And this painting is also 60 by 80 inches, and this is a whole lot of different kinds of materials. It's I started this with gouache. Actually, this is a funny tie-in. I like using gouache because it's resoluble and I can wash it off in a way that helps to reinvigorate the sense of accident that I kind of riff on in my work, and to pull out form. So I started a piece like this without a plan, and then I cull out representational passages that seem to fit the randomness of what's on the surface. So the gouache is good for that, and I just realized that it's a little bit humorous because this was a piece that was around when I was at the academy, and then a couple of years later I took out a mop and like washed it off with a bucket and a mop. So that's just like an insider bit there. These bigger marks that are coming out of these figures' hair are from that moment. So it is, here's a detail so you can see how the color is working. It is gouache and charcoal and pastel and splash, which is a type of acrylic that looks like gouache, has that matte quality, and oil paint. I think that's all the things that it is. So the color areas are mostly the oil. And yeah, you can see how the drawing, like the hand here on the left, is a good little place where you can see like the black outline. It was the charcoal drawing, and then the color is the oil. Okay. This piece is 40 by 60 inches. And it is gouache and flash and oil paint. So I'm still working in this way where I make a mess first. In a piece like this, I was having a lot of fun playing warm and cool temperatures against each other to pretty pretty quickly set up the sense of texture that lends itself to these kind of fluffy fabrics and hair that I'm inspired by, that it makes me excited. I'm also working from imagination, is important to mention for most things. This is a good piece for talking about the hybrid that's happening there. The figure on the left is entirely invented, and then I did look at myself for some of the facial structure of this kind of androgynous. I thought of this as a boy figure, but sometimes people think it's female. So there's a mix there. This painting, I didn't use all of my different kind of layerings of different materials for this one. This is just an oil painting. And this one was a real bear in terms of going in by, I like to be spontaneous, and I sometimes get stuck. And this one was one that took me a lot of kind of circling around. And I think that is apparent in the circular composition. Let's see. So I've dropped more than 4 in, but I'll do it pretty quickly. I feel like that this one, same kind of thing. I think this is my being really, I feel like I'm making drawings even when I'm making paintings, and I like to show that history and the transition between those two kind of methods, you know, the linear versus the tonal versus the color driven, kind of trying to jive all at the same time. And I think I have, I put these in kind of in response to one of the later questions, so maybe that'll be relevant later. This is a piece from during the master's program compared to the piece that I made immediately after. So that's kind of foreshadowing, I think, to one of your later questions. I'll just leave that as a teaser, I think. And
Charlotte,
that's it.
These are so beautiful. It's so great to see your work again.
Thank you, Michael.
And do you, so you had such a relationship between like drawing and painting, as you just even mentioned, where they seem to just kind of intertwine kind of seamlessly, and how you're approaching a painting is like from a draftsperson's point of view, and how you're approaching drawing is from a very painterly point of view. Were you, remind me, were you a drawing major or a painting major? You're painting, right?
I did the painting track, yeah. Mm-hmm. In hindsight, that feels kind of arbitrary. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I didn't really think, I've always thought of myself as a painter. I think that it boils down to an identity. Mm-hmm. You're kind of like a moniker, you know? So I don't know, but here I'm teaching drawing, mm-hmm. and it feels totally like where my heart is. In terms of explaining things. I feel like if I try to explain things as a painting, I'm like, well, we need to make a lot of drawings first before I can talk about this painting, you know? So yeah.
That's so cool. So for like a plug, where are you teaching?
I'm teaching at Pratt.
Yeah, neat.
And I'm here now. I just finished a class.
Cool.
I'm in the classroom.
And what's the title of the class, just out of curiosity?
It's called Visualization, Representation, and Concept, which is their very dignified title for drawing too. Yeah. Cool. And it gets that long title because it is straddles between observational drawing and schematic systems for generating form and space from visualization techniques. So a lot of perspective and cross contour ideas.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing. That was great to see.
Yeah, thank you.
And Kaitlyn, before this, we were just kind of talking. We never really crossed paths before, so it's really nice to meet you and to see your work. I was looking at it before we started this. It's really great. Would you be able to share some?
Absolutely. So nice to meet you and to be here. Thanks so much for having me. And thanks to the other two panelists for sharing their work. I really loved seeing that. So I'll share my screen. I'm going to show, this is a recent online solo show I had with the platform called A Vision for the Future. And I'll just scroll through some of these recent paintings. So this is a series of paintings I made in 2020 and 2021 in the pandemic, earlier in the pandemic. And the show, as you can see, is called Windows. And these are all small oil paintings. So they're all 9 by 12 inches. And they're painted from iPhone photos I took. So I found during lockdown, I was taking a lot of photos on my phone as a way to like process and offload. And then these paintings are pretty small and intimate, and they're kind of like a collaboration between my phone and I in some way. And you can see each of the titles is the date that the photo was taken. So it's kind of like marking time or kind of like journal entries. So I also live on the same block as Woodhull Hospital, which was hit really hard early in the pandemic. So this is a painting of Woodhull in the fall from across the crosswalk. Snowy rooftop blizzard, view out my window. So a lot of like domestic, interior, exterior, kind of mundane moments. Yeah.
Well, those are beautiful.
Oh, thank you so much.
So you were very directly responding to the lockdowns and the COVID-19 thing. It's interesting seeing, like, now that we're, knock on wood, sort of getting out of the tail end of that. Let's all hope, how artists, so many dealt with it in very different ways, some very directly with that body of work that's so poignant and kind of personal, but also like a very shared experience. I think that's really spectacular.
Yeah, thank you so much. It was I felt a lot of pressure, actually, like, what am I gonna paint in lockdown? And then I realized how many of these photos I was just taking around my neighborhood and in my apartment. So yeah, they almost became like journal entries. They feel very specific to that time period. Yeah.
And what are the scales on those, or the range of scale? Are they relatively?
They're all small, and they're all 9 by 12 inches, either vertical or horizontal. Yeah.
Huh, cool.
So they're like this. Yeah.
It's interesting too, like how much that scale was influencing. I think a lot of us, we're no longer in large spacious studios, and our experiences became so like the distance between us and the background, instead of being like 4 miles, became 4 feet, and then how that starts translating. I think it's a really interesting interpretation that you had. That's very cool.
Absolutely. I never thought of it that way, but I love what you just said. I also should say I finished that body of work when I was doing the West Nottingham Academy residency. And the scale was really helpful transporting the paintings to Maryland and back from Maryland. It was really great to travel with small paintings instead of really big ones. But.
That's so cool. Well, thanks for sharing the work. And then I guess I also wanted to allow everybody that's attending this to also just chime in and send via the chat, I guess, questions if you have them. And then I have a few just for all of you. I'll keep it sort of informal, and, you know, instead of putting you on the spot, just feel like you can just shout out. But so like when you graduated, like what did you end up doing? Like Amy and I were talking a little bit before this, and, you know, artists, when you kind of leave school, it's sort of like this, suddenly your umbilical cord is cut in a lot of ways. In other ways, it's just like this perfect thing, like all of your studies and all of your momentum has been going towards being an autonomous, self-directed artist. When you got out of school, like, you know, both practically, like in terms of like secondary revenue streams, you know, things like that, like what'd you end up doing? Like, just whoever wants to chime in first, go for it.
I can chime in. I hate the feeling of dead air, so I can't let it happen. So when I first finished, I did have some really beautiful opportunities that were given by faculty at the academy. So I had some things that were happening that I didn't have to think about. And that, you know, was enormously comforting, but also temporary. So just kind of, it delays the sense, you know, that there's like that scary nothing out there, right? It didn't, I guess there's, in terms of my work, I did flounder. I think that the pressure cooker quality has a release to it. I had someone say once, it's like if you hold a fly still and then let it go, it'll like fly really erratically for a second afterwards. And I think that was kind of what happened in my studio practice. I was cycling back through old paintings and trying to mess with them. And it wasn't until I had a gallerist start talking to me about doing a show, and then it all kind of snapped into focus. I was like, I will make real work now. And you know, I hate that it took an outside force like that for me to do that. You know, I feel like if there's any way to simulate that sense of urgency without it having to come from a gallery, then we should all do that for ourselves, you know. But it lit a fire under me, which was still experimental. And I just had all these things bottled up that I needed to try, but I just got much more forceful about them. To be very humble, I feel like I am rambling at this point. What should I?
Not at all. You're not rambling at all. No, but it was a really interesting thing, like kind of seeing the evolution of your work too. It's such a pleasure to see that after however many years it's been, 2016 to now, right? Like, and having that continuum of that experimental nature, I remember that so like profoundly, and you know, like your final thesis and things like that, like, and the, you know, the jump of scale from the relatively smaller, you know, pen and ink drawings to the larger pieces you were doing. It just seems like such a natural thing. And then, so I wonder, like, was a lot of that just like the letdown, like after thesis? I mean, having the experience, having exhibitions myself, right? And then there's sort of like, now what do you do afterwards? And
Yeah.
You see that a lot with like post thesis or post graduate school or something.
Yeah, it was harsh. I did feel that kind of empty nest sensation of just, oh, it kind of like dropped on the ground. And I had a lot of personal stuff going on that was kind of mirroring that. So it was a closing of chapters on a lot of levels. I got to do a residency during that summer, and I started teaching at Pratt immediately the fall. So there was not any downtime. There was like a month where and then got a job interview. So that was just so serendipitous and so lucky. And I'm so grateful that worked out the way that it did. So for my story in terms of what to do next, it was not that long that I was completely in the dark. But that said, having a job for me, didn't answer the question of what I was doing with my work and my trajectory. You know, like it satisfies a certain concern, and it feels like, you know, there's dignity in that, but it's not, it doesn't for me answer the real question of being a working artist and having that sense of self-managing, you know. I think having a network of people that you can talk to, you know, I think that's the thing that we can all have control over, is creating accountability with your peers and any of your mentors that you feel like you have that kind of relationship with, that could extend out into your, you know, professional life without the tether of the academy to mandate that kind of correspondence, right? Yeah, I don't want to pontificate too much. I want to hear from you guys. Kaitlyn, what do you think?
Yeah, so I remember a conversation I had right before graduating that really stuck with me. So Jenny Saville came to the Academy and gave a masterclass, and I was chatting with her afterwards, and I was really confused about whether I should stay in New York, what I should do. And she said, give yourself 2 years to stay in New York. If you don't go completely broke or completely insane, then you'll be fine. The first 2 years will be the hardest, and then you'll made it through the hardest part. And I was like, okay, that's what I'm gonna do. It really stuck with me. So I did a lot of odds and ends jobs. That summer after graduating, I taught at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, some summer courses. It was my first time teaching adults, which was great. And then I was a cater waiter. I was doing lots of odds and ends jobs. I ended up doing a residency in Leipzig that was run by another alumni, Candace Goodrich. And that in Leipzig, it was really hard for me. My work was kind of a continuation of my thesis. There were some changes, but it was very similar. But it was really hard for me to work without any deadlines, without any critiques. And I talked with my roommate at the time a lot about the idea of this prison of freedom. Like I could do anything I wanted. There was no one checking in with me. And some people really thrive with that freedom, but it was overwhelming for me. So it took a lot to push through that. And I did end up pushing through it. And I made several paintings I liked in Leipzig. But yeah, it was a huge change to go from, because I went from undergrad right into grad school, and then to just making art without any assignment, any deadline was a huge change.
Jiannan, do you want to chime in?
Yeah. Actually, right after graduation, I went to a stone carving residency in Italy, which is sponsored by Academy and ABC Stone. And when I come back, I worked for 2 artists for a very short time. Then I went to Jeff Koons' studio because I need a job at that time to make a living and maintain my production. Especially for sculpture, it costs money. And at the same time, I just do my own work in the spare time. It was pretty exhausting during this time because every day full-time job, so tired, and yeah. So then after about 2 years, I feel it's pretty enough. I'm in the job. At first I could learn something, but later, the most jobs there are mostly just repeating, polishing, packaging, creating almost nothing creative. And unfortunately, my art sale get better, and I have more stable exposure. So I quit that job after 2 years at the beginning of 2019. I to be a like full-time artist into today. So right now I'm just working on my own stuff, and I'm mainly working with Gary Posen, and so the schedule is pretty tight. I have to catch one deadline after another, like a 10 hours, 12 hours working time every day. So still a lot of pressure. Yeah.
That's great. I was always like kind of curious about that. Like, so a lot of former students of mine, having not had the experience myself, but when you're working in another artist's studio, you know, because it isn't your work, but it is, and it isn't necessarily, at least the people I've spoken to that have been in that experience, kind of talk about how it really is not creative. Like, and for many of them, it worked really well because they could have a separation between their work and then fabrication, if it's, you know, if it's working in sculpture or working on a painting or something like that. But like, then did you find that that was actually, in hindsight, like now that you've left that experience, did you find that it gave you some insights into, I don't know, fabrication or the use of materials that you didn't have access to previously?
Yeah, definitely. I think I learned a lot from that experience. From like for example, how to mix plaster, the exact proportion, some detail like this, to like how to pack your work professionally. So from all this, I think it's pretty helpful for my own work. But I think it's just, you know, depends on people. I mean, the assistant job, some people pretty enjoy that, I think, because, you know, stable income, stable life. But for some people like me, that's just like a temporary solution, and after some time you're gonna get tired of that.
Yeah, and then and then also, I mean, all of you are teachers, you know, or educators as well, you know, and also within the, you know, your area of expertise, you know, you're teaching painting and drawing and sculpture. What have you found, you know, Charlotte, you've right out of school, you know, you started teaching at Pratt, and you have a really respected and vibrant career as an educator as well. And, you know, and all of you, and like, do you have anything, you know, that you'd like to say about the relationship of being a, you know, a teaching artist? You know, for myself, I find it, you know, incredibly rewarding. It's super inspiring. It's challenging in the best possible way.
Should I be the most excited one again? I want to answer. Teaching drawing has straightened out my brain in so many ways. So many things that I was confused about in my work. I look at old stuff now and I'm like, I almost give myself a teacher critique of my past self. I'm like, this is your problem. You need to sort this out. Never do that again, you know. And it's just, I'm so much faster to cut bait with something that's not working, because I need to have that kind of transparency with my students. You know, it doesn't serve anyone for me to like beat around the bush with them. I just need to tell them my opinion, you know, and I've got a lot of things to do. So I'm like, okay, this is what I think, and we're moving on. So I love that I'm able to bring that kind of more fresh and decisive attitude into my studio when I, you know, it just turn 90 degrees and kind of treat myself the same way has been great. Anyway, that was my reaction to that. Thank you.
So cool. And Kaitlyn, you've been teaching for quite a while as well, right?
Yeah. So I started at the Museum of Fine Arts in Boston, and that was great. They were very like technique-based classes, so like still life oil painting. It was amazing because we could go down into the galleries and look at like a Sargent painting and then come back and incorporate what we saw into our own work. And my bosses there, I was young when I started. They gave me a lot of freedom, so I really learned a lot on the job. And then I started at MoMA, so I knew I loved working in museums, and I wanted to stay in New York City. So I was hired for a 6-month temporary job, 3 days a week, helping out with MoMA's teen programs. And then that turned into me working there for 6 years in lots of different programs. So programs for teens, community partnerships, accessibility programs, so programs for visitors with disabilities, lots of different programs. And it was really, really different at MoMA. And I got an amazing, I don't want to call it an education because I was working, but I learned so much from their programs and working on those programs. So it wasn't technique based at all. And we were really focused on like serving underserved audiences and kind of fighting against this idea. I think a lot of native New Yorkers who visit MoMA are really intimidated by the artwork. They think they should understand it right away. They need to have a PhD to understand it. And we really fought against that idea. And we tried to make visitors feel like anyone's interpretation was valid. You don't have to be a scholar of art to have a really meaningful experience with art. And I worked, a lot of my work was with teen programs. And the number one reason teens were coming to the museum for these art classes was not to learn techniques. It was to find community and to find like-minded teens like themselves. So art was kind of like a way for us to build community, whereas like community was the number one. And that was so fulfilling. And we really encouraged experimentation too. And I found that influenced my work as well. And I was so inspired by all the participants and programs there.
That's great. And then through that evolution, have you found that you're kind of gravitating more towards one demographic versus another? You know, like, I mean, some people really find a home in graduate school or undergraduate school, or more in community-based, you know, teaching.
Yeah, it's a good question because I teach all ages. Right now, I'm teaching K through 12 for Cooper Hewitt Museum. I also have a private painting student who's in his 80s. So I'm really teaching all ages. I really loved working with teens and young adults because I worked with them a lot. I should also say too, for a lot of my time at MoMA, I had a full-time fellowship. So it was like a 9 to 5 Monday through Friday with benefits. And then in 2019, I switched to freelance. And there are pluses and minuses of both. So there was great stability with a full-time job, but then when I switched to freelance, less stability, but a lot more time to make my own art and to make my own schedule. So pluses and minuses to both.
That's so great. And Jiannan, so is this your first time teaching when you're going to be at the Academy? I know you've mentored a lot of people in sculpture, but coming up next semester.
I was in like a teaching residency in Maryland and China before, and last year I was teaching a relief sculpture elective at the Academy. Yeah, so I teach relief sculpture. Yeah.
Cool. And then I guess before you know, also for all the attendees, if you'd like to, if you have any questions, like just feel free to text in. I guess that might be the easiest way, but also if you kind of want to talk amongst yourselves and just to kind of share thoughts or anything. Charlotte, help me out. You like
I like to say stuff. I love to fill time. Yeah. Also, as a person who's taught on Zoom quite a bit, I have a strong knee-jerk reaction to fill dead air. I just don't want it to happen. I was thinking while Kaitlyn was speaking, I'd like to piggyback on what you said, Kaitlyn, because I also feel like I have gained an education by teaching. Learning to teach the course that I was honored to get here at Pratt was like its own. I felt like I got a second master's degree, because you think you know what you're doing when you're in your control of your own work. You know, you have so many resources that are intuitive or innate, or you kind of don't realize you're doing it or why, but you're just doing it. And then when you are saddled with all this group of people that are just coming from every part of the world, every language, every every form of perception, all these, just everyone's different. And I'm teaching freshmen in college, so they have made a commitment that they want to pursue something serious in the arts, but the skill level and the level of seriousness specifically to drawing is all over the map. And I have to give them clear directives. You know, they're not at a point where they're ready to be self-directed, or ready to really handle that much of a prompt that has too much freedom involved with it in the beginning. But I need to get them there by the end, right? So it's like this. It's a heavy lift of a type of transitional moment in an early arts education landscape, and it took me a long time, to feel confident that I was delivering that. It was stressful. It was very stressful to learn how to teach in the beginning. Anybody who's going into it, I want you to know, try to get a good night's rest the night before classes, and like drink a lot of water, and remind yourself to sit down. Those are my pieces of advice. Yeah, but it taught me a lot. It taught me a lot for my own work. That's been really useful.
That's so cool. How was that transition to teaching via Zoom? Like that was I know for myself, it was a nightmare.
It was horrible.
Yeah.
It was horrible. I'm very type A, and I'm very concerned with having thought of everything. And I want to explain everything. And you feel like an amputee in that situation, because you can't, you're trying to teach something physical through a screen. So I made a lot of videos, and I got really, I think, quite good at video editing, all things considered, and have a bit of like a rig of equipment. I can get camera angles and slice it all together in a video, time lapse it, all that fancy stuff. But it was horrible, and it was particularly debilitating to not be able to help as much as I wanted to. The pace of being able to give feedback and just I want to be able to just point at somebody's drawing is something that you take for granted. It's like learning how to digitally point was something that took forever.
And Kaitlyn, did you have did you continue teaching during that whole thing, and did you transition to Zoom? And
I did. Luckily I teach virtually for Cooper Hewitt still today. I was teaching earlier today. Luckily that is so much less technique based. It's a lot of discussion about museum objects, and we do some brainstorming, but it's not. I taught one figure drawing class on Zoom in the pandemic, and yeah, it's so much harder to teach it like a technique based class, charcoal or painting. over Zoom. You just can't, it's not the same as in person. It's doable. And we made it work, and they made some awesome drawings, but it was hard. But the more discussion-based brainstorming classes they work really well over Zoom, and we're able to do classes with students from all over the country, which is really great.
I think for better or worse, that teaching on Zoom helps me to be more hands-off. So it helps me to trust my students a little bit more and in a different way, and to pose activities more as provocative, as a prompt, to kind of give space for them to have to navigate it on their own more. And that, I think, has been useful coming back into person, into the classroom, that I tend to kind of try to give more space for different interpretations of assignments than I would have previously.
Cool. And the questions are beginning to pour in, so I'm going to start doing giving you those. So Peter Drake, our provost, as you all know, have any of you curated shows or written criticism, and if so, what were those experiences like?
I curated a lot of shows around the time that I graduated. So like the year prior to graduation, I curated like 9 group shows. I don't know how I did that while I was painting my thesis. And then also I curated group shows afterwards. And then I participated in like apartment group shows and like art collective group shows and stuff like that. It was a great way to meet other artists and get connected. Actually, the online show that I just shared early in the panel, the curator of that show I met like 10 years ago, right when I was out of grad school at like a small apartment group show. But it is a lot of work. Curating is a lot of organization, especially group shows, because there's so many artists you have to get together. Is a lot of work. I don't do it anymore. Just because I don't have the time, but it was a great way to build a network. If you have the energy, and go for it. It's a great way.
I did create like 2 or 3 group shows in China, which consists of academy artists, like my peers. But like Kaitlyn saying, it's just exhausting, a lot of work. So yeah, I don't do that so much. Yeah.
And let's see, we have another question from Jacob Hicks, who said 2022, about to graduate, who asks, what advice would you give to new graduates who don't have gallery relationships but want to balance earning money for survival with continuing a professional art career?
Yeah, live frugally, go to a lot of openings, have a social life that's just plugged into the galleries. You know, everybody should be your friend. Is one piece of advice. And it's a hustle, you know, it's a lot of work. I think that for me, actually, here's the piece of advice I think you might not expect about being kind to yourself. For me, I was so frustrated and so kind of angry when I wasn't making work as fast as I thought that I should, that I was kind of like mean to my loved ones and just a grump, you know. And in hindsight, I regret that. You know, I feel like don't do that, because it's going to take a while, you know, and you can only like work hard and be disciplined, but you can only work as hard as you can work. So don't feel like every day that it's not, that you haven't conquered the universe is some kind of a failure, because you have to be kind to yourself, you know, don't be too stressed.
Yeah, that resonates with me too. Like, you know, sometimes making money has to come before your practice. If you know, if you want to make art, you have to eat and sleep, you know, in an apartment. So yeah, be kind to yourself. And there's going to be times when you're getting to the studio all the time, making a lot of work. And there might be times when other things are taking precedence, but you can always find your way back. It's been helpful for me to think about art as not necessarily like a profession, but as like a vocation. So it's like, how do you do this no matter if you're making money on it or not? I think it's important to keep making the work, and then things will start to appear. I really recommend the book/program called The Artist Way. In a nutshell, it's basically like you write morning pages, 3 pages every morning, and you take yourself on an artist date every week. And it's all about nurturing your creativity, despite what job you might have, or you know, how to keep it thriving. And it was really helpful for me. I love The Artist Way.
Very cool. And then a classmate of Charlotte and Jiannan, Amy Hughes, who's now our director of student services at the Academy, asks, what did the panelists think about staying in New York post-graduation versus relocating and making work elsewhere? So it's kind of interesting because all of you, Charlotte, you stayed in New York. Kaitlyn, you went up to Boston and around, and Jiannan, you're sort of like between New York and back to China. Do you have any things you'd like to share about that?
I worked in both countries because that I think that's the best way for me to making art, because some of my sculpture process require some production, which and that part I have to do that part in China for a lower production fee. So, but for some shows, for some shippings, I have to do that part in New York. So I think it depends on what you do. Depends on I mean, what works best for you. For some people, New York maybe is the best place, but it's not the best option for everyone. So you have to see, yeah.
So what aspect of the production process do you like outsource? Like, is it you create the sculpture and then have it cast, or
Yeah, actually, I do the mold making and casting in a factory in China, but that was years ago. Right now, I do some 3D printing process, and that part, the cost is still lower in China, including the shipping fee. So yeah, so I have to fly there and back to do that part. Yeah.
Well, I'll jump in on that. So Michael, to recap the question, or I see it here, advice, no. Do you stay in New York post-graduation versus leaving? I never left. I think I was personally a little bit afraid of how I would make contacts if I left. But then, are you too busy to socialize? You know, it's kind of like double-edged sword. Where do you get your best inspiration and motivation, I think, is a question. If you're inspired by nature, then, you know, there's nothing wrong with leaving. It'd be cheaper, right? But I think that for me, the fear is that I would drop off the map entirely and not have the motivation to meet people if I left. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think there's any reason one should have to stay in New York in this day and age. There's so many ways to share your work now that didn't exist like even 15 years ago, right? There's so many ways to get your work out there that I mean, like back in the 80s, you had to be in New York if you wanted to be in the center of the art world. But I don't think there's really any reason to stay unless you really want to. I mean, I love how much art there is to see here and all the people you can meet. And there's a lot of opportunity, but at the same time, it's a tough city to live in. It's an expensive city to live in. It's a hustle and it drains a lot of energy. So yeah, I mean, you have to find what works for you. I finally feel settled. I started feeling settled, like really settled, maybe like 6 years ago. And once you're settled, it's hard to leave because you're so set up. But it's hard to get there. I mean, I lived in an artist collective for several years that was like, it was dirt cheap and it was such cheap rent. And I had a studio in the basement, but it was like really poor living conditions. My room was teeny tiny, no window. We had bed bugs. Like it was a sacrifice. There's a lot of sacrifices about staying in the city too. But you meet so many amazing people.
So cool. So that's like that's it for the questions. Well, so I guess I have one other one. Like, so in your working situation, do you kind of have a live workspace, or do you find it necessary to have a studio outside of where you live? I know that's always been a constant dilemma for myself. Like, oh, this is really great when the studio's outside, and then it's a pain in the neck. Or, you know, some people really love having a studio just off of where they live, or being that intimate with their work. And other people really need a place that's separate, you know, to kind of separate the home life, or, you know, to compartmentalize things. Do you have any like thoughts on that, or have you made decisions one way or the other that really staunchly like, I have to live and work in the same space? Or
I have a live work environment that I've maintained for about 10 years. And I have really enjoyed it. It works for me. I am currently in the process of rethinking that. So if anybody has a studio for rent in Greenpoint, that's what I'm looking for. That's what I'm in the market for. But I also, I think that the intimacy that you have with your work when you can go in your pajamas while you're groggy, or like have a kind of midnight fit if you feel like it or whatever, it does suit me to a certain extent. And it's I think it's good for people who don't like to ever stop, which is kind of, that's maybe my vibe. And if you're a homebody, right? If you're a homebody, then it'll work for you. Now, if you're a person who might just like take naps and watch YouTube and like eat cookies by accident and not know where the day went, then might end up hating yourself for having a studio in your apartment. I like what I'm enticed by about having in pursuing an industrial space is just that white box. You know, the place that could be like, it might as well be a padded room. You could go in there and anything could happen, and it doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if it's toxic because you don't have to sleep there. It doesn't matter if it's dusty, as long as you don't have studio mates that you're also endangering. But I think that from a material standpoint, that's why I want to do it, so they can make a bigger mess.
I have a studio separate from my apartment, but it's a 10-minute walk. So I get there so much more than if I had to get on the subway. I think taking the subway would be a lot tougher for me. One of my favorite investments is I bought a Razor scooter last year that I ride to my studio. It's just a push Razor scooter. And it makes my commute go from 10 minutes to 4 minutes. So convenience is key, whether it's if you live in the same space or if it's close. It's great for me to have a separate space, but proximity is really important. And for many years, I offset the cost. I split the studio with another artist who had a different schedule than me. So like she'd be there in the day, I'd be there at night. So that's a good solution too.
I never rent a separate studio actually, because for saving time, saving money, and also I just too lazy to work out. And you know, when I was working, I have some like a special habit. I like watching TV when do sculpting, and I want to cook anytime I'm hungry. So yeah.
That's great. And we have another question from Yupin. What inspires Jiannan to do his work? I'm very impressed with all the work he has done. Always surprises me. How long does it take to finish his recent work?
Thanks, Yupin. My recent work are like what I said. No matter what subject they are, some are soccer, some are like a social news. They are kind of like a diary. Is a way to connect my childhood memory, like the soccer symbol, the soccer match. It carries my a specific year or event in my memory. And how long takes my recent work are actually they are digital sculpted at first. Then I sent the data to a company in China to do 3D printing. Then they send back. Then I have to do resculpt some part, to do some fixing, and hand painted with acrylic. It takes about 1 month to do one piece. Yeah.
So is that like a transition in your work? Because at least when I was seeing you work at the academy, it was very analog, right? You're building with your hand. Are you using like 3D, like actually sculpting within a digital space and then doing it that way? Or are you doing still an analog sculpture, scanning it and then sending the data elsewhere? Just out of curiosity.
I build everything in computer right now. I get from a very simple geometry form, and it's almost it's just almost like working on real clay for me. Actually, before that, I was working with a polymer clay, the kind of clay which you could bake in your oven. But the reason I like work with digital data is, you know, you can change it all the time. If you work with clay or the physical thing, sometimes it's too late to change it, especially when you can finish all the armature part. And but with the digital sculpting, you can change it anytime. And yeah, I just feel more free. It's more flexible. Yeah.
That's great. Well, wow, I just am so impressed by all of you. Like it's been such a great pleasure to like kind of reconnect with both you, Charlotte and Jiannan, to see your work again and to get to talk to you again. And Kaitlyn, it's a pleasure to meet you. And you know, I'm like so impressed by all of you and inspired. So
Likewise, thank you so much for having me. This was a lot of fun.
Thank
And
you,
then-
Michael.
Yeah.
Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
And one last thing, when Amy's reminding me, any last advice for the students before I let you all go?
I would
Um,
say think of it as like, this is so cheesy, but think of it as a marathon, right? So what happens right when you graduate or right immediately after might not affect you as much as you think it will. So think of the long haul, not the immediate short term.
I agree with that. I think that even with the good things that happened, I was like clinging to each one of them, like, yes, oh my God, like something good, thank God, you know, but even that is like, you know, there will be things, they will happen, you know, it's a process, takes time, you know, so it's, I think just to ratchet down the reaction and the importance that's placed on like each little event and see it in the grand scheme is good.
Just if you want to be artist, just work hard and show your piece as much as possible, no matter physical shows or social media. And if you have a job, you have to be more, like you have to work hard because it's very easy to get lost.
Yeah, well said.
Well, again, thank you all. This is so much fun. Great to see all of you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Great to see
Thank
you all.
you.
Do we sign off? We're saying bye now.